Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We will officially begin the meeting of the Cook County Commission on Social Innovation. So this is our April meeting. Welcome to everyone who is joining us on the live. And we will officially call the meeting to order. I will acknowledge that we have Howard Males on the Zoom and also Alderperson Maria Haddon as well virtually. Joining us. I know that we may be waiting for about one or two more virtual, so we'll make sure to acknowledge them as they come in. So we will officially begin with public testimony. Just as a reminder, public testimony requests or written comments can be submitted up to 24 hours in advance of the meeting, and it is submitted to the number 7th, the word district.office@gmail.com. That is 7district.office@gmail.com. And I do see Alderperson Haddon has hand up. Commissioner Haddon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just wanted to be present for the role.
Will do. We have acknowledged your presence here virtually. Thank you. So I'll ask staff if they can confirm whether we have received any written comments or requests to provide public testimony. Debbie?
No, we haven't.
It has been confirmed that we have not received any. So just again, for anybody listening, I'll repeat that email address again if you're requesting any testimony. The email is 7thdistrict.office@gmail.com. And thank you. Without further ado, I don't know if you want to go straight into the presentation or if you want to give any general updates, but I'll hand it over to Vice Chair Lane so that we can officially begin the meeting.
Thank you very much. Is this on? No. Good. Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Naya, and welcome everybody, and welcome spring, which has finally arrived in spades. So let's hope that it holds. Pleasure being with everyone today. The Commission will recall that last year we had testimony from Reggie Greenwood, the Executive Director of the Supply Chain Innovation Center and Business Incubator at Governor State University around electric vehicles. And specifically, he was offering actionable policy recommendations by which he believed Illinois and Cook County could become the Delaware of the electric vehicle industry. And today we have some very significant testimony building on that original presentation. I should tell you, I've seen recent press accounts that the electric vehicle sales accounted for 7.6% of monthly new vehicle registrations in the Chicago area in January 2023, up from fewer than 4.7% in January 2022. So we're finding now that with the broader selection and signs of moderating prices, mainstream car buyers are increasingly turning their electric vehicle curiosity into actual purchases, which presents both an opportunity for the county and a challenge. And to address that, I'm privileged to introduce Bob Greenlee, who is the President of Tusk Philanthropies. Also, some of you may know him as a former deputy governor of the state of Illinois. And Bob shares my view that electric vehicles present issues of social justice and environmental justice. And he wants to talk to us about some ideas he has by which county may get involved to drive justice in both of those verticals. So Bob, thank you so much for being with us, and we eagerly look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to testify. My name is Bob Greenlee. I am the president of Tusk Philanthropies. We're a philanthropy that generally focuses on hunger issues and on getting people to vote on their laptop, on their mobile devices. I heartily recommend both of these. I also serve, however, as a board member of the Illinois Science and Technology Coalition, whose role is to improve Illinois as a science and technology hub. And in that capacity and otherwise, I've been working on clean tech and technology related issues for about the last 20 years. And during the course of that time, I've seen a lot of ideas come and go. I've seen a lot of opportunities come and go, but one opportunity that I feel like is very much in the moment and is something that I'd like to testify on today is the importance of EV charging as an environmental justice issue, and the importance of EV charging done correctly in neighborhoods to promote equity among EV ownership. I think Vice Chair Lane noted clearly that the interest in EVs is growing, that EV ownership is growing. Obviously, the Biden administration is doing its darndest to promote more EV ownership. And that is, we think, a good thing. As I noted in the materials that I submitted to the commission in advance, on-road transportation continues in Cook County to be the largest source of CO2 emissions. So it is an issue that the county needs to address and the region needs to address in order to continue to do our part to address climate change. That being said, there's a limit to which the county and the county's limited fleet can by itself tackle the EV challenge. So the question is, what else can we be doing and what else should we be doing? And I'd like to talk about charging in that capacity. I want to start out by noting in that 7.6%, a lot of people, I think, believe that EVs, electric vehicles, is kind of a lakefront issue. However, the research that has been done suggests that of all groups of people who are interested in EV ownership, this is not an issue that is, led by the affluent. It is not an issue that is led, that is solely an issue, a province of people who can afford them. EVs are coming down rapidly in price. And it seems that Latinos and African Americans, when polled, suggest that they're more interested than whites in purchasing EVs. So why are we not seeing this? What we see in the same polling is that people believe that they do not have EV charging in their communities, and lacking access to EV charging in their communities, there's an obvious and I think justified fear that having an EV and not having a way to fill it up is not a sensible economic investment. But it is, I believe, it's an issue that is resolvable, and I'd like to talk a little bit about how it's resolvable. But first, laying into addressing the problem in a little more detail, the biggest issue, to the next slide, please. The biggest issue we face, quite frankly, is the inability for people who lack off-street parking to have ready access to EVs. It's very easy if you have a parking garage or if you have a parking lot to install. It's not necessarily cheap, but it is doable. It costs about the same to get a 240 volt plug as it would be to get a new appliance, a new washer dryer put in an EV charger or access to EV charging. But if you park on the street, there's no such option, and it's not a ready option to see. We also find that despite the fact that there are, as you will be told, there are EVs in parking garages, there are EVs in shopping centers, EV charging stations in each of these locations. That's cold comfort to people who are thinking about parking on the street in the Chicago winter and trying to decide whether their car is going to have enough charge the next morning. What we have found repeatedly in studies is people are unwilling to travel more than a quarter mile to park their car. I can tell you, I am personally not willing to travel more than a quarter mile to park my car on the street. And if I need to do that to leave my car to charge overnight, I would think very long and hard about EV charging opportunities. And that represents a large potential universe. It represents 40 million people nationally. And in an area like Cook County that has a large number of regions that have densities of over 500 people per square kilometer, you're talking about a lot of people. I think all of us who live in the city, who live in the county, know quite well that almost large percentages of our population, large swaths of the county, are people who park in the street. And those people need EV charging access. What are people doing now? Is what we've seen in some anecdotes and some stories in Washington, D.C. is people are running, kind of long distance extension cords out into the street and allowing people to put their plug their chargers into extension cords. That's not safe. It's not smart, and it's not a viable long-term solution for ourselves and others. People are, trying to find ways to use level 3 or fast chargers and then bring their vehicles home. This is not affordable. Level 3 fast chargers cost more to install, and as a result, the electricity that is purchased through EV fast chargers is not significantly cheaper than using an internal combustion engine, and it's not sustainable. This is not a system that would allow for broad access to electric vehicles. If you can move to the next slide, please. One thing that I want to emphasize, and this is probably not a mystery to anyone in the room, we already have an equity problem with EV charging. If you look at the city and the location of each EV chargers across the city, there are broad swaths of the city of Chicago, let alone the county, where there are just no EV chargers. And there are large areas that have heavy penetration. The reason for this is fairly straightforward, and that is that the model that has been used for EV charging heretofore has been solely based on a commercial model, finding ways to put EV chargers in parking garages and in commercial establishments that are easy to maintain parking spaces, and where charging companies believe that they can install cheaply and maintain cheaply. The challenge is that exactly this business model exacerbates all the problems that we've seen in the past around food deserts and around pharmacy deserts, that the areas that don't have enough commercial establishments and large shopping centers in the first place, and the places where, as we've seen with Walmart, the large commercial enterprises are going away, means you're going to have even fewer EV chargers because there are no commercial establishments on which to base EV charging. So this model is really not going to work. And what happens if this model doesn't work? Ultimately, what that means is that you will see a greater propensity and greater percentage of EVs in the areas in which there's more EV charging and less EVs where there's less EV charging, which means over the course of time that carbon emissions will be higher in those areas that don't have EV charging access, and they will be lower in those areas that do have EV charging access, which creates exactly the same environmental justice issues we're seeing across the city right now. And it's an issue that theoretically should be addressed, and right now at this stage, as we stand here, can be addressed and can be avoided. So how do we look at avoiding it? My recommendation is to look at neighborhood EV charging. And that means finding ways to promote businesses, innovations that allow for EV charging on the streets, in neighborhoods, in a way that's cost effective and works for and with neighbors, and wherever possible, keeps the economic benefits of EV charging within the community, rather than shipping it off to the owners of large EV charging networks elsewhere. I want to start out by talking about what stands in the way of that right now, because obviously if anything were easy, people would have already done it. So let me roll through them. The first item that I noted is that the business model heretofore has been focused on commercial-based EV charging. It's also been focused on EV chargers that look a lot like gas stations, like gas pumps. That I think by itself creates a problem for neighborhoods, Nobody wants a gas pump on every block. Nobody wants to live in front of somebody else's gas pump. Nobody wants to have 5 or 6 of these along the blocks. So EV chargers then to work in a neighborhood have to be designed in a way that work within the neighborhood. In addition to that, I mentioned this earlier, but EV chargers and particularly the level 3 fast chargers are expensive. And they're probably too expensive to be in a neighborhood setting. Realistically, what neighborhood settings need are level 1 or level 2 fast chargers that people can park at overnight, get their charging done overnight, and not have to run the economic risk of having to have those parking spaces turn over every 30 minutes as a level 3 fast charger would to make economic sense. Because those types of models, A, create constant turnover and parking, create animosity because parking spaces seem like they're taken up for weeks on end, and don't really make economic sense. Other things that are challenging, obviously permitting. It is hard and time consuming to find ways to create spaces for EV charging stations. It's not something the city has had to address. It's not something the county's had to address, but it is something we will need to address in order to do this right. And last is the question of interconnect with utility. It is certainly the case that if not thought of thoughtfully and worked in partnership with ComEd, that you could create distribution issues where certain areas of the grid are oversaturated. There are companies that have addressed this issue. There are companies that are addressing all of these issues. And I'd like to turn to them right now as I turn to the solutions. In the next slide, you'll see I listed a series of companies that are all looking in various ways at neighborhood EV charging solutions. They look at them in different ways. Companies like VoltPost look at putting EV chargers into lampposts. That is a useful way of looking at the space. Companies like It's Electric, which I've worked with in the past, working with property owners to get to connect in their chargers into property owners' grids, which has the benefit of allowing property owners to get a share of the EV charging revenue, keeping revenue within the neighborhood, but also deals with some of the electrical distribution issues. Other companies like Connected Curb and Chargy have already deployed their product broadly in Europe and have started to see solutions to many of these issues where the problems are different, but are not so different that we can't learn from them. What do they all have in common? Number one, they look at level 2 chargers instead of fast chargers. This is an economic issue. And it just makes economic sense in neighborhoods that we not overinvest in the infrastructure. Number 2, they try to find ways to use existing ways to interconnect with the electric grid, whether it be for a light post, a property owner's existing grid, or otherwise, so that you're not tearing up streets, you're not creating expensive new interconnections that become cost ineffective. All of these are designed to improve, to work with the look and feel of existing neighborhoods, so that people who are on the same block as these do not feel like their neighborhood is turning into a commercial area. And many of these look at property owner partnerships, which I think personally is very important, because I think that people who are responsible for helping to site and to be near an EV charger should receive some of the economic benefits from them. I want to close my conversation by doing what I always say is the why now. When I talk to social innovation measures, and I work with a decent number of startups, I always say, look, 30% of your argument is going to be about why do this. And I believe strongly that I've already made the case that doing EV charging in the neighborhoods is a good thing to do. But there's always the 70%, which is, why should I focus on this now? Of all the issues that you as commissioners have to face, why is this an issue we should look at right now? The one point I would point out is that the Biden administration currently has a $700 million RFP out to cities and municipalities, counties, and the like, to promote EV charging, particularly in low and moderate income neighborhoods, and particularly in communities with a low ratio of private parking spaces to households, or a high ratio of multi-unit dwellings. That is, places much like many parts of the county. As a result of that call for proposals is due from public grantees May 31st. And it would be an awful shame if the region is not able to get our share of that federal money to be used towards exactly this type of work. It's also important to look at this right now because over the next year, we're expecting to see even that 7.6% of new EV vehicles titch up because we're seeing many new and many more affordable models on the street. And it is a time when people are really interested in the opportunity for EVs. We should have the infrastructure that comes to match them. I'd like to close by just offering some ways that the county can be helpful in the process. I don't pretend to know all the answers. I don't know all the levers that the county can press, but I would like to mention a few just to show. First, obviously, the county is a large landowner. The county has many opportunities, even within neighborhood environments, to allow for EV chargers as adjacent to or connected with its property in ways that would allow for other people and for residents to understand how this technology works and that EV charging is available for people in their neighborhoods. The next area that I think the county can be helpful as an organizer. There are most of these social innovations, most of these businesses have the ability to operate without county funds, often have the opportunity and don't need any private fund or any public funds in order to run their business. However, they do need access and they do need the ability that the county has to tell citizens that this is a real thing. This is a real opportunity. It's not too good to be true. And that if people are interested, here is a way to do it. So the pulpit that the county has is one that can be used effectively. Another tool that I've thought about that could be used effectively is the land bank. Obviously, having the opportunity to require for people who are developing through the land bank to offer EV charging kills two birds with one stone. Because it requires as people who are making new developments within the very communities that we want to make sure have EV charging available, that they offer these amenities to people for whom they may not offer off-street parking. And fourth, as I mentioned before, the county can be a grant recipient under the federal funding application. And I strongly urge that the county put in an application and seek the opportunity to get these funds for the purposes mentioned above, or honestly for any purposes. I just think I think that the region should get what it's due. That's the testimony that I've prepared. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, and Donna, there will be some. Let's open it up to the commissioners for any questions or comments.
Howard on the com.
Commissioner Mails.
I have a brief question and a comment. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. The editorial earlier this week in the Tribune made an argument for an opportunity with the rebuilding of North Lakeshore Drive. Sadly, South Lakeshore Drive was already done, and DuSable Lakeshore Drive, apologies. The proposal they made, if anyone here had not read it, was to also electrify the drive to the point where the cars driving on it could charge. Now, this brings to mind how our own phones today are different in many cases. Today, you could put your phone down without a cord and it charges. In the old days, it had to be hooked up. And I'm wondering how much pressure we're looking at in terms of the future of what innovation is going to come in the way our phones evolved, what can happen with the cars themselves, because are we proposing to change infrastructure for a version 1.0 electric vehicle that may eventually give way to something that could charge while driving? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. I think a very reasonable question. The response that I would give is it is really hard to try to guess technology in advance. And the two things that I would think of as important are, one, making sure that we do as much as we can now to deal with the next 5 years, because that is important. I don't think that I would recommend putting in infrastructure, even EV charging infrastructure that's built for 20 years, when we know that the technology may be different in 5. But I would look at any solution that is adaptable so that the ability to use the interconnect can be used then for different purposes as different things go and change over time. So that what may be the case as a charger right now could then connect into something that lies just on the street in 10 years if the technology is adapted as such. But I don't think I would let that change what we're doing right now, because I do think right now's problems continue to need to be solved.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
I have one. Oh, there you go. My napkin was covered. Okay, sorry about that.
Wait, make sure the other one has green on the top.
Yes, now.
There we go.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your testimony. Are you familiar with Spark Charge in Boston? Joseph Abebe?
I've heard of them. I don't know them closely.
Okay. Joseph and I had a conversation about this about a year ago. And of course, his business has really exploded. I do like the idea. It kind of reminded me of when I used to live in Minnesota. And I was totally unaware during the wintertime that people were heating their engine blocks by using extension cords. And that was a mess. And I lived in an apartment building at that time, so all you saw were extension cords all over the place. So for us to avoid something like that would be great. But the other thing, as far as the wireless charging, are you familiar with anything moving in that particular direction?
My understanding is that there are companies who are exploring it. I've heard people talk about it, but that it is a number of years away.
Okay.
It's, in the 5 years away type of reality. And that's for the charging infrastructure more so than the vehicles. I'm not really sure when the vehicles will be ready for it.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Yes, please.
Thank you for your testimony. For the record, Patrick Brutus. Well, I do appreciate us having to develop our communities, right? For not today, but for the 10 years from now. I think that's important in, economic, social, community development. We need to, build up for the infrastructure of tomorrow. A lot of the presentation focused on, the industry itself, but what I would love to hear more about is the trends of actual EV cars being purchased by people who buy cars in these communities where we are lacking the EV infrastructure, right? For example, I work for the city of Chicago and Parker Planning, and we've had a number of folks come to us looking for city land to build this kind of infrastructure, albeit in neighborhoods where we have not been able to see that kind of capacity, right? There haven't been a number of Teslas, for example, or some of these other vehicles, or these ancillary cars. And so we didn't know if that was going to be the right. So we see the interest is there. So if you could speak to the overall industry in terms of the trending of cars being purchased in these neighborhoods where we don't have that industry.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And as you said, it's a chicken and the egg question, very much, right? I believe it's around 5 years ago, the city of Philadelphia pursued a residential EV charging pilot, and it didn't do anything because the EVs that were available at that time were like the expensive Teslas that were $80,000 and $90,000 a year. And the reality in the neighborhoods of Philadelphia that they were pursuing them, people were not interested in buying, whether or not there was charging available. They were just not interested in buying a $90,000 Tesla and parking it on the street. And I get that. But right now, Chevy Bolts are running $25,000 a year. They're not radically different in price than non-EV vehicles. And there is, at least from the survey data that we have seen, there is considerable interest in many neighborhoods on doing this, but where you see interest is also tied to people who believe they have access. Because there has been a traditional concern about, what they call range anxiety, that people believe they're going to be left without electricity. And if you don't know that you have steady access to EVs, that is a problem. So we believe right now that this is a situation where you need some infrastructure in place in these neighborhoods, because the vehicles are now ready and available, but it's the lack of psychological assurance that is playing more of a hurdle in purchasing, more so than the lack of access, the lack of vehicles.
Yeah, I would agree that it is a chicken and egg situation, right? Build it and they will come, and, also, hey, are they coming, right? But I would say that, for the county, right, we want to see something like this take off and actually be something that could benefit, the overall, right? The life, the quality of life, the revenue, how we, look at all these other factors, but in a environment such as Chicago, where we are trying to actually promote a transit-oriented city, where we are encouraging a higher density, neighborhoods closer to our transit buses and our dreams, where, this kind of concept is counterintuitive, right? I feel like we would be more successful, looking at this, as we sprawl out, right, into our, suburban areas. What are your thoughts on that in terms of urban versus suburban, right, and how EVs can be, how the industry can be successful in either or both, right?
It is certainly the case that all of us would prefer that transit get used more from a climate change perspective, and honestly from a community perspective. If more people were using transit, more people would be together at more times, and it's just better for creating community cohesiveness. That being said, despite all that all of us are doing, there are still certain parts of the city that have better access to transit than others, and certain parts of the county that have better access to mass transit than others. And those places where you're 3/4 of a mile from a bus route, you're still probably going to drive. And in those neighborhoods and those places where you are lacking in reliable transit access, it is often the case that something like this, an EV access, would be a useful impediment. If you have to take 3 buses to go where you're going and you can drive there, more often than not, you're still going to drive. So as much as you and I and most of us in this room would love the city to maximize transit, there are still many residents who lack access to off-street parking and who do need to drive. And for those people, I think it's valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morgan. Commissioner Malone, please.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to testify. I appreciate all the information you shared with us. Quick question for you, for you. First, I know that you said that we can sponsor a response. Usually, Chicago and/or Cook County will do a federal response and choose an anchor organization to convene anyone who's interested in participating. Do we know if a coalition like that has already been pulled together and who the lead is? Sometimes it's MHUB, sometimes it's either Chicago, but just to know where to start before we fill out an application and there's already a coalition of 8 or 10 orgs for counties.
Yeah, and candidly, I don't. I've talked to people who've talked to the city, and candidly, the city is not anywhere on this. This is an unusual time in city government. And I have not heard, I mean, obviously I represent ISTC, which often acts as a lead agency in this. We're not active. I've not heard that MHUB is active. I do not know anyone who's active on it, and I'm a little bit concerned about that.
Understand. Another question I was going to ask
If I may just kind of do a quick plug, the county does have a program. We've started the program that's just to install charging stations. And the way that they're doing input is that they're working with different municipalities, Stark County and organizations, and also they have tried to undertake a very robust surveying with residents on what locations are needed and to identify that. And that's just given some of our ARPA funding and ensuring that we want to make sure to grow and look at those deserts that exist. So we have started. We're nowhere near, I would say, where we want to be because there are so many areas that we want to make sure to focus on. But we are trying to convene the different municipalities and at least on that scale. But again, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
I know you have something else, Commissioner Malone, but let me just follow up briefly on what she had offered. You say your coalition is not jump forward. Might there be an appetite to do so with the county?
Yeah, I'm certain that we would be interested.
Now, as I understand it, you are in charge of policy for the coalition, is that right?
I'm in charge of the policy committee. That's
Yeah,
correct. So
yeah.
yeah, I'm sure we would be interested in supporting it if there are, if there is a, if there is a will, we would help provide the way.
Okay, well, we have the will. We'll talk about that. Okay, and sorry for interrupting you, Commissioner Malone, please.
Something you said about electrifying the drive, I thought that was really interesting, and just having a traffic study or a market study, seeing more people in disadvantaged communities are driving with their traffic patterns are, and then aligning chargers with those traffic patterns. Has there been a traffic study on what those patterns are in Cook County or in Chicago, and or a market study on people's ability to purchase? Because one of the things that comes to mind for me is I want the volume of purchases for EV charging, EV cars to match the amount of money invested in the charging so that they're not just like sitting, right? And people are using them. And so I'm just thinking about usability and traffic patterns, and if there's been work on that, or if we need to find someone.
I cannot speak to it. I can't speak to whether there's been a traffic study done. I agree with your point though.
Any other comments or questions from any of the commissioners? Please.
I have just one more question, and that maybe did speak about it, and that is, we're talking about the retail cost of owning a EV vehicle. But what about the operating costs? I once heard that the operating costs are much higher than a conventional gas combustion.
Quite the opposite.
It's
quite the opposite, because the maintenance is significantly lower. So it's interesting. I've been working with a company that's looking at doing all EVs for New York City taxis. And for taxis, which are really heavy utilizers, they look at it, the operating costs as being around 30% lower. Largely because electric motors don't go into the shop, and because they don't take the same amount of constant heat and constant challenge that an internal combustion engine with a bunch of pistons pounding against each other constantly do. So it is actually, the cost of ownership is somewhat lower. That's what we've seen in a number of studies.
Thank you. Commissioner Curtis, please.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. One more question. Just thinking through formulating a partnership with municipality. In this example, have you thought about what that would look like in terms of kind of working with either the city of Chicago or a city or a county with where there is already an existing fleet of cars? For example, I know the city of Chicago has an existing fleet of hybrid cars and EV cars, and so like, how would that look like to you in terms of scaling up? Because we can say that, as goes the city or as goes the county being the leader, right? How do we bring that to, a higher level of awareness so that consumers follow government by government leading the way in, these sustainable technologies, right? So have you thought about that?
I thought about that. In different contexts, it really is a question of how the municipality in question or the unit of government in question uses its fleet. So for example, buses, having a bunch of green buses is great, and I highly promote that. I'm very happy. I'm right off the Chicago Avenue bus, and I see the Chicago Avenue green bus go by all the time, and I'm super excited about it. But ordinary people are not going to look at that and say, okay, well, I'm going to be like this green bus, because they don't drive a bus. Ordinary people, though, if you have building inspectors who have vehicles, and those vehicles turn into personal use vehicles, or they drive them home with them, and they are parkable on the street. In that case, then that does become highly relatable to people, and the ability to use a municipal fleet that is used by people who are like elevator inspectors, just to give a classic example. That becomes relatable to ordinary people because they're ordinary type vehicles that they might see otherwise. So yeah, those could be very, very real opportunities, but it just depends on how the fleet's being used and controlled.
Thank you. It's always about thought leadership. Other commissioners have comments or questions? Roger, Commissioner Cooley?
Yeah, thank you. Roger Cooley, Chicago from Policy Action Council. Interested in just thinking about for the framework for making sure that the county does apply for this grant, assuming that would be some combination of the Department of Sustainability, Economic Development, and also even wondering if public health would get involved with particularly a conversation around the lowering of emissions in the communities that make the transition to more EVs. Seen some articles just noticing in neighborhoods that have had higher adoptions of EVs across the country have had fairly dramatic drops in emissions. So just thinking of that as another public health benefit for this work as well. But also, if moving forward with this program, thinking about it as a jobs program as well for whoever are the installers, and making sure that that's getting connected to CJA, which is the Illinois bill that was passed a couple of years ago that really pays attention to equity in the expanding green economy. But also thinking about some of the community organizing could be done as public education to talk through all the savings that folks get through the Illinois rebates for EVs, as well as the new IRA EVs, as well as understanding the operating cost difference. So really selling so not just saying, hey, we're going to get you the infrastructure, but really promoting community members that EVs could actually long-term save a lot of money for your own household. Just seeing all those pieces. So excited for it.
That's a yes.
That's a yes. That's a yes. A yes to all those. And it is important, I think, to think about the jobs impact, not just in the install, but also in the maintenance. Because obviously pieces of durable infrastructure like this are going to go out. And it's important to have proper maintenance. Quite frankly, it's important to have, trained trades maintenance on this. This is electrical equipment that you do not want to be, jimmied around with by any random person.
So it's still a new industry, so it has all of the opportunities associated with an industry and how we want to shape it, design it. Any other questions or comments?
Just one more.
Okay.
We know that technological advancement and infrastructure are drivers of economic growth. And so is there a nonprofit that is like all in on the advocacy work of this? I'm curious. When it comes to either engaging residents or engaging business community or engaging elected officials. And when we're thinking about this, you said you did some work in New York, and one of the things that came up for me is their installation of link boxes. There's about 3,500 throughout the city, and how they pay for themselves. So the combination of something like that, plus EV charging, naturally already being in neighborhoods on sidewalks, does that sound like something that's reasonable to you when you think about the lamp pole example? The electricity that already has to be sourced to pull together a link box, which for anyone who's not familiar with them, payphones were replaced in New York City with link boxes. They provide charging, internet, GPS, phone, etc. A lot of a combination of services, PSAs, and they're paid for through revenues. So they 100% pay for themselves, and they also generate funding for counties and cities. And so something like that combined with electric vehicle charging, that's that small and that agile. Does that sound like we have relationships where we could kind of pull all these things together? So before we start working with I'm interested in. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so your two questions. The first question is there a group that's all in on this? Nationally, there are at the federal level, in the kind of the Chicago metro area. I don't think there are a lot of supporters, but no lead. There's a lot of Indians, but no chief, as it were. The second question, on the link box question, yes. I mean, the model of EV charging is one that can generate shared revenues that could cover things like that. That's not technologically infeasible at all.
Any other questions or comments? I have a couple of my own if we've exhausted the commissioners otherwise.
I wondered, is P33 involved in this at all?
I think they would be interested, but it's more focused on business attraction than,
Okay, thank you. And this has been an exceptionally enlightening presentation. Thank you very much in fielding the very informed questions of the commissioners. The question I have, a question I have, looks at the 7 initiatives you identified on your slide that's called Solutions for Neighborhood EV Charging. And you indicated that there were different models, different geographies, different approaches that were taken. And I'm wondering if you could kind of educate us, at least at a high level, about what lessons might be learned from those experiences. What kind of a model might that suggest for us, or alternatively, any models we might kind of rule out as likely ineffective here for whatever reason?
Sure, complicated question, but one that I will try to take a stab at, acknowledging that, like everything, because of exactly the chicken and egg problem that we've talked about, a lot of these companies are in their early stages. Connected curb and charging are both European models, and London particularly has much more EV charging on its streets than we've seen anywhere in the United States. What we've seen from those is that the model can work. Those models, the one takeaway that I think we've learned from those is that you really do need EV chargers that are designed for the community. If you have the charge point style, really big EV chargers, that those models don't work well in ordinary communities where ordinary people live. The companies like Voltpost and the EV charger that you see on my slide there, that is mounted on a utility pole. Seattle has been running a pilot like that. One of the challenges that they have seen is that, and this is like point of failure and operability issues, is that those mounted poles with long charging cords, the cords break, and then they're out. And one of the things that some of the other chargers have looked at is detachable cords, so that you have less risk of the cords breaking, because that's the biggest point of failure. It's, and this is like the gas station where the person leaves their car and then like the gas pump and then drives off, and then boom, like that happens with EVs too, because people are equally not smart for every type of vehicle. So that issue, particularly for things that are mounted and have long chargers, are a little bit of a challenge. And then I think the other thing that we've learned is, and this is the same for anything that involves electricity, the ease of interconnection, the ease of working with utilities is critically important, because utilities can slow everything down if they're so oriented to do so. So finding ways and finding models that work to use existing interconnections, whether it be the light post or whether it be an existing property owner, are pretty critically important. Those are the points I would say that are learnings from elsewhere.
Very much appreciate that. Any other, Commissioner Ray?
Well, I just wanted to kind of circle back. Just actually last week, somebody came up to me, a family friend, and mentioned that, they were taking a road trip with an EV, and something that would have taken about 12 hours ended up taking over 20, because of the different steps that you need to take. And I presume that that's one of the reasons why I want to make sure that we're expanding accessibility. So I'm excited about that. And I think that as we undertake as a commission this issue, and the fact that there's already sort of a discussion happening, and to Commissioner Cooley's point, yes, there's different departments that are looking at this. The one that he didn't mention was the Bureau of Asset Management. They're the ones that are working with the Department of Environmental and Sustainability. And I think it's a great idea to plug in the health system, again, for its implications around pollution. And we already see that in communities like the ones that I represent. I'm in the southwest side of Chicago. We have a lot of pollution and environmental injustices, particularly on a particular matter and such of big trucks. So I'm also interested in knowing what's going to happen with the bigger, vehicles, and how exactly are those incorporated with the different levels, et cetera. So I'm excited that the county is looking at this, that we are looking at this as a commission, because I think that what we can bring in the skill sets and the understanding is that it's really going to be really great to see that. And I'm pretty sure that the departments will be more than willing to either come talk to us about their initiatives and see if there are any gaps so that we can help support them. And I did want, if you can all indulge me really quickly, wanted to ask that if she could kind of share the ones that the county owns, because I just realized that the map is up of the areas where they are, the Cook County stations have already been identified. And these, of course, are growing. So Thalia, if you could share the screen on your end so that we could see the map.
Do I have to be a co-host?
You should be able to. And if we can't get it for whatever reason, we can always share it with people. Yeah, she could, I think you're a co-host, but if it's not working. Give me a second. We'll share with everyone. I think we might not be able to pull it up right now, but well, the reason why I wanted to make sure to share that with you all is very similarly to the maps that were provided by Mr. Greenlee. I think it's important for us to look at those other gaps and see what we can do, and again make sure that we're working together and in collaboration. And I'll make sure on my end to circle back with the departments to see if they already have shown interest in the RFP that will be out. I'm presuming that they have, but just to do that additional nudge just in case they haven't.
I put the map in the chat.
Yeah, my understanding is the city of Chicago has not pursued that funding. And of course, we're in a interregnum here for the next month or so. I'd like you to stick around if you'd be so kind. Mr. Greenlee has generously offered to collaborate with the commission as we incubate the ideas surrounding this sort of an initiative, which obviously has great complexity, but also enormous potential. Commissioner Nay, with your permission, I'd like to transition into a working group report, which I think could bear fruit as to this issue as we think about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. So we had a working group in place looking at kind of the EV ecosystem, kind of seeing if we might be kind of the Silicon Valley of EVs here in Cook County. And Commissioner Killen was chairing that working group, and others were associated with her in driving that agenda. I would like to ask, I see that Commissioner Thomas, I believe, is not here. Is she here virtually? No. So Commissioner Cooley, what I'd like to ask of you is, if everybody's willing here, might this be a reasonable subject to incubate within the context of the industrial policy working group, given that I'm seeing this as largely entrepreneurial, although it may have various public sources of financing, and those obviously should be optimized. I think it really places the county in a little different position than governments historically may have seen itself. And I see it as analogous to other efforts that the industrial policy working group has under consideration. So I'll throw that out to you a little, and I understand it's a little, without necessarily a great opportunity for you to reflect on any of this, let alone what I've just suggested. But given Mr. Greenlee's willingness to support that work, and speaking on behalf of this coalition, which I believe, given his role within the coalition and the mission of the coalition, I think would be a very natural partner for us, following through on Commissioner Malone's idea that if we had a nonprofit that we could partner with here, strength in numbers, also expertise, talents, resources. It seems to me that we might very well be able to jumpstart this effort within the context of the policy that is being developed, and I invite you to speak about that too. And hopefully, even in working with other county agencies, framing a response to the RFP that is has a late May dates to it. I know that's a tall order in a short time, but also a lot of money available, and a very important cause that I think will have substantial social impact implications, as well as environmental, ecological implications, both of which will be manifested disproportionately within disinvested communities. So I guess perhaps, and I apologize for catching you off guard, but here we are. That's the nature of opportunity. It tends to be serendipitous. So if you could kind of react to that possibility with Commissioner Killen's permission of consolidating the working group around EFES into the industrial policy working group and getting the benefit of her thinking and the as well as the other players associated with that working group. It seems to me it fits some of the, or maybe all of the characteristics of the ways in which the county can help fill market gaps through entrepreneurial initiatives on its own, whether using its own personnel or outsourcing or developing a strategic alliance for those things. So I've said enough, giving you an opportunity to reflect on this for at least seconds, maybe minutes. So I'll turn that initial question over to you.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner Lane. Yeah, I guess in consultation with Commissioner Kellen as well as Commissioner Thomas, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. But exploring, building off of the idea of the industrial policy / community-owned assets working group. But definitely seeing that this is obviously going to be a big market failure for placement within these communities.
Yeah.
And really seeing this as an opportunity to make sure that that gap is filled and that, this is a timely opportunity to.
And a time-sensitive opportunity.
Right. Timely and time-sensitive opportunity to pursue, ideally, with the collaboration of the county who would hope to have the capacity to actually submit the grant for the funding with collaborators.
We always assume that.
Organization, and that,
We'll make sure of it.
yeah, and bringing in other partners as well, and really seeing that this is a pilot for how do we get these assets out, leveraging the funds that are existent from the federal government, but as well as from the state, and really, and sounds like pre-existing ARPA funds that have already been moving in this direction, and a lot of good work to build upon. And then using that to leverage and think about the other models. Again, Mr. Greenlee highlighted really thinking about the grocery store access, with Walmart making their kind of devastating announcement this week of the
Maybe since you're going there, and I'm glad you are, I knew you would. Why don't we invite you to kind of transition into the report you were going to be making anyway, and I think that would give Mr. Greenlee and others the benefit of how this has progressed and where it's headed.
Yeah, so our next stage, so looking at other assets beyond the EV and electrical grid, thinking about public banking, public grocers, housing, extension of housing, pharmacies, childcare, other potential assets. But looking at having a conversation with Commissioner Anaya, Commissioner Flores from the Economic Development Agency.
Yeah, by the way, that conversation is now being scheduled, so we're going to be able to accelerate that, and I think that will be very useful to catalyze this effort as well.
Right, and then really figure out how to make that into a proposal for an ordinance that would move, create that task force or working group that would really move that forward and solidify that policy within the county, and then we can incorporate this as a pilot.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your willingness to react positively under duress, especially when your cohorts are not even present. And I'm a great believer in always asking for forgiveness rather than permission. So this fits into that category.
Yeah,
Hopefully they'll go along.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We very much appreciate that. Thank you. And we invite you to remain. We're going to have at least one other working group presentation, which you may find of interest, or since you're now one of us, we're delighted to have you participate. Thank you. So Commissioner Alston, Commissioner DeBow, if you would be so kind as to share with us recent developments in connection with the crime prevention, public safety, et cetera, working group.
Take this one, but Harry jump in. So, you'll recall that, I think in our last meeting, we spoke about progress with, the Cook County Hospital Foundation and with, their outreach to the hospital itself, and the idea that we would organize a tour of the hospital, but in particular, the trauma center of the hospital, to, learn and brainstorm and sort of evaluate how we as a commission in partnership with the Cook County Hospital Foundation and other community partners might begin to think about ways to enhance what the trauma center is doing with underserved neighborhoods, particularly on the west side. And in terms of what happens when people leave the trauma center, how do they stay connected? How do they can get, continuing rounds of care? How are their families who are coming into a trauma center also connected to continuing rounds of care? And, because it's sort of the epicenter where trauma presents and is treated, it seems like, focusing on what's going on there and how we could enhance resources to tighten community connections could be very valuable. So, to update you, we have been in touch with the foundation. Sylvia Cazaldo-Sykes is the head of the foundation. She's actually new in that role. She reached out to Letitia Close, many of you may know, who's leading public affairs, government relations for the hospital, and is the person that would link us in to this initiative at the hospital and trauma center. And we had a very good call, Mark and Harry and I, with Sylvia and Letty a couple of days ago. And, I would say, very interesting to learn. They have a number of programs going on with the community already, which you would expect. But are, I would say, very open and interested to see how we might build on that further. So, there's mobile food programs going on for screenings and nutrition that the hospital is working on in partnership with the Greater Chicago Food Depository. There's different work with various community organizations, but I think, our lens on this is in particular, and Harry jump in here, we have been focused on how could the trauma center better coordinate and integrate with CBI organizations and social service organizations, health organizations, and community to, stop the cycle of violence. So I think they're interested in that as well. One of the other things that came up at the commission, I think was in the last meeting or the meeting before that, was, is there the possibility of also working with the trauma center and the hospital, defining community wellness initiatives very differently than just trying to stop violence. So I think that's also on our mind longer term as well.
Absolutely. It's really pivoting on what we talked about before when we said the value proposition around not just solely looking at violence reduction, but community wellness and all of the different determinants of wellness. And so rather than be responding to the need, how do we stop violence? Like how do we increase community health, well-being, and economic stability and mobility? So in terms of this, it would be getting with the hospital, looking at their already approach to continuum of care, and say, how do we continue to swim upstream, if you will, back into the community and create stronger, what I would view as led issues and organizations and connections led by people impacted by the criminal legal system. And how do you bring their voice forward in terms of leadership and ideation of solutions that are not just simply about responding to crime, responding to violence. So it's that type of framework that we're looking to, create not only some discussion, but some solutions.
So, you know, the ideas of the levers that we're currently talking about and pushing, it would be interesting to get this commission's reaction to things we may be missing are, you know, can we bring more funding to bear there? In particular, that's where the Cook County Hospital Foundation would play a role, but potentially bringing in other funding resources, you know, as well as policy recommendations that would come out of this, you know, for the county, from the county. So as the next step, before we kind of turn to your thoughts and discussion, and, you know, I'll tell you the next step because you guys can help us, step into that next step the right way. We are going to have a follow-up meeting, kind of small meeting with Letty, with the Cook County Hospital Foundation. Letty is going to bring in leadership from the hospital and the trauma center, in particular, some of the folks who are already working on these programs. And they wanted to keep this as kind of a small group initially. So it would be Commissioner and I, it would be Commissioner Marc Lane, it would be Harry and I. And then they also requested that Commissioner Deere would be there as well. So we're going to schedule that for mid-May. The idea of that is it would be kind of an ideation session of just us listening, learning, hearing what they're doing already, and trying to figure out how do we build on that, and what's needed. Right, this all starts with really what's needed. And I think we would tour the hospital as part of that. We would like to bring your thoughts into that meeting. And then, you know, following on that meeting, we would have further thoughts and, you know, potentially the opportunities to bring the commission into other planning sessions that go on. So that's kind of our right now, and would love your reactions and ideas that we should take in mid-May, if anything occurs to you yet. I mean, we need to learn more to kind of put some meat around this. So it's a bit of chicken and egg at the moment, but you may have thoughts on, you know, things we should bring in as potential levers we can push that we haven't yet discussed or we're missing.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy and Harry. The notion here is to build on the strengths that are there and see where we might add value. And in a disruptive fashion, in the most positive sense, create a demonstration project or pilot around the ideation that follows based upon our learnings, with a view toward testing a theory of social change that may then be scaled up and rolled out throughout the county and beyond nationally, to the extent that you know, we see that there are things that we can bring to bear. But as Wendy rightly points out, the first step is for us to get as familiar with what's going on there, what they find successful, what they find suboptimal, and where the county might play a role from a policy perspective in bringing together parties, serving as a convener, a collaborator, a catalyst around the opportunity, as I would define it, of looking at public safety through the lens of public health. So it's a very exciting opportunity, and thanks to Commissioners Alston and DeBoe for their extraordinary leadership on this topic, and there will be more to report. If any of you have any thoughts upon reflection, please invite you to share them with any of us, and we will obviously want to reflect our conversation with the board, with the commission's input. I think it's very useful. Are there other working groups that have any? Commissioner Cooley, please.
Great, thank you. That's exciting to hear about the collaboration with County Health. I'm wondering if you all are also connected to West Side United, as well as part of that conversation, to thinking about the larger healthcare collaborations that are happening on the West Side and the Alliance for Health Equity and their wellness plans, and also that they're also focusing on, they have a working group that's focused on using Medicare dollars and reimbursements to help cover the cost of vegetable boxes and meals, and then also looking at how they can also purchase from community vendors as part of that economic development work, and that as another opportunity, and potentially county care could be part of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything that leveraging money, reimbursement dollars they could possibly use to help pay for programming.
Yeah, so, we're not yet. We haven't yet reached out, beyond the hospital and beyond the foundation, but that is absolutely the idea. Is there's gonna be a lot of groups, West Side United for sure, and the Alliance for Health Equity, I think it sounds like exactly the right kind of organization, so I think as we kind of maybe figure out a little more of the what, we'll figure out, who really needs to be part of this and inventing it, but I think there is the potential for a lot of collaboration. That's really interesting that you mentioned the county cares, because I think that was sort of our supposition from the beginning too, is that in some way, there's a lot of resources in that hospital that, is great, and how can we build off of that to make more, like, just as one example, we crystallize one opportunity. They already have social workers in the trauma center that help people as they leave and go back home and go back to the community, but they don't have that many. And, maybe they need more, right? And maybe those connections into different organizations in community would be better, and maybe there's resources that are needed that happen.
Thank you very much. Do we have more?
No, the only thing I would just say on that note is also how to centralize those resources. I know that that's something that we've looked at. I talked at the last meeting regarding the domestic violence efforts that they have within the trauma unit, and we did approve a budget line item last year about that. So I'm just wondering, in addition to the social workers and the other, like, how do we do wraparound in trauma and in partnership with other folks? So I think that that's important. One of the things that we have seen in CCH is oftentimes people they're sent to a different department, or they're sent somewhere else to get additional help. And even with county care, the application process is done separate from a lot of the initial interactions. And we've had constituents also have a lot of just questions and issues with different things. So I feel, how do you make it easier, and how do you help centralize that? So as soon as someone interfaces with our health and hospital system, that we're able to again do that wraparound. And I know that there has been attempts, but I think that anything that we can bring to the table to help solidify that, I think would be important.
Thank you for that. That's a very practical suggestion. It's not only about effectiveness, it's about efficiency. Are there other working groups that have a report to present this evening? If not, Chairman Anaya, with your permission, I have a couple of closing remarks. One is, next month, we're not going to have a subject matter expert provide testimony. Instead, we are going to follow the format we did for the December meeting last year, which was found to be very productive, and it is, we're meeting as a committee of the whole, having a general exploration of opportunities to drive positive social change. Each of the working groups will be invited to reach out to others to support their existing efforts, seeing what has legs and build on that and recruit additional support for those efforts. That which appears to be less enthusiastically supported can be looked at through that lens as well. But I do encourage everyone to attend in person next month. And this is going to be a very useful, productive spitballing session. With a lot of attractive outcomes to be hoped for, and it really is dependent upon the commission to achieve that goal. And it proved to be a very effective use of time in December, and so much so that it had been recommended by a number of the commissioners that we do this periodically. So this is when we'll be doing it again next month. So that's one thing I wanted to call to your attention and invite not only your presence, but your active participation, and to the extent you are leading or involved with one or more of the working groups, we'd love to hear from you and how things are going and what help you need and what direction you see. So that's next month. One other preview of a coming attraction. The commission is working collaboratively with Social Enterprise Chicago, which I'm privileged to chair, in developing a series of capacity building workshops for nonprofit leaders, specifically those that are looking at creating or improving the performance of earned revenue strategies. And we hope to do this throughout the county over the next several months. The first one, I'm told, will be late in May at a time and place to be announced. Those of you who have an interest in having Social Enterprise Chicago come to your locality for that purpose, it is likely that we would find an office holder, a policymaker who would love to cooperate with us in making that happen. And I would be thrilled to ensure that that happens successfully, and having the local nonprofits in each community become as self-reliant and self-sufficient as possible. So I'm identifying for the end of May would be the first one, hopefully the first of many. We did this a few years ago when Congressman Garcia was the chair of the commission, and we did probably a dozen of them, and they were highly effective, and the time has come to go do them again because time has passed. It's a new unit of time and a new season, so let's bring to bear the talent and expertise and experience we can to help nonprofits throughout the county drive positive social change, relying upon whatever resources they may be able to cultivate. So those are the two things I wanted to call out for you. And otherwise, again, I would like to thank Mr. Greenlee for his wonderful presentation. And as important, no more important, his willingness to continue to work with us in incubating the ideas that he has now prompted here. So thank you again. And back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lane. I appreciate that. I did have a few just general announcements that I want to make sure to relay over to the commission. So as you all are aware, the governor's emergency order will be lifted as of end of May. So we're excited that that's happened, because that means that we have opportunities to meet more in person and to do more of the activities that Vice Chair Lane has just highlighted. But with that said, I do want to just reiterate, I know that there's been some challenges with people coming in person, and we're having conversations. And I know that there's been a misunderstanding on that I'm the one asking for this. I just want to remind everyone, this is a governing body officially. It was created by ordinance, so therefore we have to go by what the state statute states around open meetings and public meetings. I understand that some folks do need accommodations, but we do have to just make sure that we are in person as much as possible, given again that this is a governing body and it's part of the Cook County Commission. I'm sorry, the Board of Commissioners. So because it is created by ordinance, I just want to reiterate that I'm not trying to be the bad person here, but we do have to make sure that we are following what has been set forth by law. The other thing, I just want to, just as a reminder, I know that we haven't revisited the certification for OMA, but again, because this is a governing body, we do need to have all of the commission members do the OMA training. So we will be reaching out to you all if you have not submitted your certification, but if you have done it and you just haven't sent it over, please feel free to send it over to us so that we can have it on file. We just, again, want to make sure that we are abiding by what has been set forth to us. And other than that, I know that I'm going to be, I had already had this conversation with Vice Chair Lane, but we are going to be having some, what I hope some entities of Cook County to come before and, tell us and explain some of the work that they're doing. And some of those is the Cook County Land Bank, the Justice Advisory Council. And now after today's conversation, I think it's very fitting to have the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership come up. I know we've talked a lot about, you know, what that workforce development looks like, not only on EV, right, but many other instances. So I think that maybe at some point we should have them come, and even if it's a short presentation. So we'll be working on those, and they may be in conjunction with some of our other presentations. So we'll try to, you know, stay put to the time. We don't want to, you know, have people obviously prolong the meetings too long, but at least we'll have a holistic view of what are the proposals and also what is happening and how we can actually tie those together. Because I think that's important in regards to proposing something and also implementing and making it efficient. Yes, Commissioner Chloe.
Makes me think of the Environment
Mhm.
Commission and wondering about the overlap with the conversation today and if they have any intent.
Yeah, so and that one particularly it's very interesting because we have a environment and sustainability committee, we have a commission, and we also have the department. So it may be interesting at some point, you know, to have them all maybe together present, because I know that there is a lot of work happening, and we're excited that the chair of both the commission and the committee is an environmental lawyer, but also an environmental engineer. So a lot of knowledge and understanding of the issues and great willingness to move a lot of the solutions forward. That was it on my end, so I'll open it up for the commission members if there are any announcements. Yes, Commissioner Malone.
Not so much like an event announcement, I just want to flag for everyone in case you haven't been watching that Title 42 is repealed on May 11th. So migrants have been a big conversation in the state and the city and the county. And so given that Title 42 will be up on May 11th, we can expect an influx of more migrants for the foreseeable future and probably pretty aggressively. So if you know of any efforts around social services, emergency housing, things like that, I know the county has done a lot of work around migrants as well as emergency housing and out migrating and supporting with services, but I think it's going to take all of us. So I wanted to make sure that that was brought up because ultimately it's really, really important that we all don't walk away from this issue and try to put our best foot forward.
Thank you for highlighting that. Any other? Okay, so without further ado, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Yes, Commissioner Burgess, second by Commissioner Malone. All those in favor? All those opposed? Nice having, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe and be well, everybody. Enjoy the sun.